Budget 2010 brought to you by Harith Fund Managers.
Personal income tax relief for individuals amounting to some 6.5 billion rand, far cry from the 13.6 billion rand we saw in the prior budget with Trevor Manuel. But does it compensate for inflation would be the key question.
Judging from the calculations that I've just done, it doesn't. There's bracket creep almost across across the spectrum, less at the lower income groups and more towards the upper income groups. But interesting, if you have a look at some of the other taxes that they're proposing, things like your carbon tax or carbon type tax on motor vehicles.
New vehicles to be instituted 1st of September.
And I would imagine that is going to have a lot to do with engine size, so there's probably going to be taxes there. I mean, you mentioned on vehicles that are less efficient. Syntax is of course going up, which that was to be expected. Fuel levy to go up another 25.5 cents. So you know, there's a clear indication there that there's a shift to burden the upper income groups again. So between the bracket creep and some of these extra taxes that they're putting in, I suspect that they're tapping the upper income groups a little bit more.
No surprise. I mean, that's exactly what we were expecting. He had very little room to maneuver.
I concur. I mean, he really had. I mean, he gave us 6.5 billion supposedly to solve the bracket creep, but as George said, didn't quite give it to us and then took it away in other areas. That's to be expected. And if you remember back to the heydays, I mean, you mentioned 13 billion. I remember back probably 3 or 4 years ago, and Trevor Manuel was giving back as much as 18 billion, which you were way, bracket creep and then some in the process. We've had the good times. We've benefited.
Well, I made the point that when Manuel took office, we contributed as taxpayers 40% to government revenue. Over his period, it came down to under 30%. It looks as though the situation is now going to be in reverse as we go forward and trying to get out of the global economic downturn that has hit South Africa as well.
And I think you're right. And I think what's important is if we take the whole cycle, when we at the worst of the point of the cycle, and it's probably this budget here, we're better off than we were when Trevor Manuel came in. So things improved, they've worsened, but that worsening is not taking back everything that was given to us over the last 5, 6, 8 years from Trevor Manuel. We're still ahead of the game too. But when it gets tough, someone's going to pay, and they're going to go to the top earners. They always will. It's how it's going to work. I mean, there's still a lot, the individuals paying far more tax than the companies. That's not a great thing. That balance is slowly shifting.
Andre, looking at foreign exchange control reform, there was mention made of that. Can you take us through a little bit more detail?
There's very little detail on any new. If I can just come back to the tax issue, I think we are lucky here that, of course, you couldn't give back anything much to the taxpayer, but we are lucky that the new normal of 40 didn't become 50% in South Africa, and I think it shows that there is some care in how they would manage this increase in the tax burden here.
As you say, very little information on further foreign exchange control reform. Andre?
Yes, I think hardly any indication around that. The only, I think, interesting aspect about the currency was really a clear statement from the minister that the Reserve Bank is going to intervene more aggressively to try and stabilize and reduce the volatility of the currency, and I think we're going to see something new on that front when it comes to implementation. But at the same time, he made it very clear, and I think this will take out some of the uncertainty around the currency, that there is going to be no attempt to peg the currency to a particular value, to the dollar or the euro or anything like that. So it's not an intervention at that level, but more maybe to try and reduce volatility, which I think would be a good thing down the line.
Pierre, looking for some relief in this budget. Interest income exemption increased to 22,300 per year and to 32,000 for those over 65. We're looking here for little small pieces of positivity out of the budget for the South African consumer.
Yeah, no, I mean that was expected. I think those increases are in line with what one would expect. There's nothing major about that. I just want to go back to one point that Andre made about the currency and the fact that the Reserve Bank will try and stabilize it when it really gets volatile. I just want to make the point that if you look at over the last 2 years, at the graph of the currency against something like the VIX, the volatility index in the States, which is really unrelated to our currency, it shows equity volatility in the States, how close the correlation were both in the time when the rand weakened, when the crisis happened, and subsequently when it strengthened. And really to take the point from that there's a limited amount you can do to stabilize the currency if you're the Reserve Bank. I think one must be realistic about that.
The rand is a barometer of risk aversion out there, and if risk aversion increases, then we're going to see a sell-off in that local unit.
Absolutely we are, but to take the rand volatility, I mean, the last show I did last year with you on the desk at 15 December, it was $150 euro, now it's 136. The rand volatility has actually come down quite markedly in the last 3 or 4 months, and we're seeing the dollar and the euro and other such international crosses from these emerged currencies actually being more volatile. There's a lot to do obviously with Greece and the pig nations, etc., etc. But the rand's not as volatile as it has been in the olden days. And I go back to 2001, where we were moving 30 cents in a day sometimes, and the gold miners would move 14-15% on the back of that. Volatility has eased off. Just a quick point in giving some back. I mean, the one area was the 12 billion to social grants.
12 billion, 8.4 billion to antiretroviral AIDS drugs, and also infrastructure spend remaining level at 846. But we knew that from the State of the Nation.
We knew that. The
case.
social grants now, the child grant goes to 18 years old. It's not a heck of a lot, but that is money that flows directly through. These are, at that level of society, there's no saving happening. It really is, the money is earned and then pretty much immediately back into the economy. So that's the money that's going to slosh around. It's next to 12 billion. In the big picture, actually relatively tiny. In a budget that comes in at almost $1 trillion, 12 billion is just over 1%.
And those looking for the leftist influence in this budget, we're looking for social grants to be pushed way out. Would you say that that's modest in terms of 12 billion increase on social grants?
You know, every little bit counts, and they've been pushing out social grants year after year after year. So, you know, it's not 12 billion in itself is not a lot, but it certainly just incrementally adds to the burden that the fiscalist is going to have to bear. In terms of the whole leftist stance, I think there was a limited amount that government could do. I'm glad there was no mention of national health insurance schemes, because that is just simply unsustainable in the current climate.
Delayed for another 5 years is what they put on the table, that national health insurance scheme.
Yeah, I would say at least 5 years. I just don't, at this stage of the game, see how relatively such a small proportion of paying individuals, call it anywhere between 5 and 10 million, is going to be able to take that burden for a full for the other 40 million. So I think we need to be realistic about that. I don't think it's something that's realistic for the time being, certainly not with the budget deficit figures that I'm seeing at the moment, especially if you want to maintain things like social grants and whatnot. So overall, you know, I mean, it was as socially responsible as it could be given the circumstances.
Let's start rating this budget. Andre, to you in Cape Town, what do you rate the Finance Minister, Pravin Gordhan's budget 2010, on a scale of 1 to 10? 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10 at least. A difficult budget, well done. I think it's very predictable. It doesn't have the flair of Trevor, but it shows a dogged determination to keep a reasonably tight and sensible control over government finances.
Pierre, rating from you?
I agree. I would give it 8 as well. I think one mustn't underestimate how tough the conditions are against which this budget needed to be delivered. The global economic picture is still quite uncertain. I mean, it's improving, but there is certain uncertainties, and well done.
Simon?
The number that came into my head was 8.5, so I'll stick with it, although consensus is below me. But it was, I mean, everyone's saying it, and we've got to say it again. This is a tough first budget. You know, when Trevor Manuel came in, it was tough, and then he had the easy years. This is a baptism of fire, and I thought Pravin Gordhan did well, even to the point that I was expecting him to be a lot drier and a lot more boring. He had some jokes. He poked some of his deputy ministers, made jokes about chairs collapsing and the like.
He gathered a number of laughs.
It was actually, so even just in terms of delivery, in terms of what he's done, I think it was right up there. And I mean, it's to the benefit and credit of South Africa and the government that in the last 16 years we've had top finance ministers.
And George?
Yeah, I would have to stick with about that. Maybe not quite as high as all of that, but certainly I would give it a thumbs up. And I like the stability that came through in terms of the policies. No intervention in the rand, I like that. No change to inflation targeting, I like that. Like I said, no mention of national health insurance. So the only thing that I could fault them on is I'd like to see more of a push to try and put a freeze on government spending on wages. I'd like to see more of an effort made on trying to spend efficiently. I don't think enough came through in the budget.
More detail on those lines.
More detail, exactly. Yeah.